wherever you're coming. Folks, wherever you're coming. The record of the period is back and seated. Just to bring you up to speed, ladies and gentlemen, I intentionally set somewhat of a very tight trial schedule just to make every effort to get this matter resolved. In talking with the attorneys during our break, we are way ahead of schedule. So it's entirely likely that we will adjourn after the next witness, and in all likelihood, it's looking as if this case will easily, at the latest, get to you all by Friday. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that so that you didn't have concerns about Saturday, Tuesday of next week, as I mentioned yesterday, and just wanted to bring you all up to speed on that. So we're probably going to get out a little bit early today. We're going to continue to try and keep the pace and move as efficiently as possible to minimize any further inconvenience to you folks.
And just so we can hit the ground running, we want to wrap up tomorrow really quick, but we had 2 witnesses today.
Okay, right. Yes. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Call the next witness then, Solicitor.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Joshua Faber, this week.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be true, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good afternoon, Detective Faber.
Hello, Solicitor.
You are currently working for the Fountain Inn Police Department.
That is correct.
And how long have you been up in Fountain Inn?
Since January 2006.
So, over 10 years?
10 and a half years, yes, sir.
How long have you been a detective for the most part?
About 5.5 years.
And went through the academy. You're a certified law enforcement officer.
Yes, sir.
You were working in investigations in 2011.
I'm sorry?
You were working in investigations in 2011.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And July 13th, 2011, did you have occasion to work an incident homicide over at the Fair Point?
I did. Yes, sir.
Were you on duty at the time in uniform, or were you called out from the house? Tell the jury how that happened.
Detective Hawkins was actually listed as our on-call detective. And so anytime an event happens, he would have been the first one to get called. And I actually received a call from him stating that this incident happened at Fair and that he thought he might need some help.
And did you respond there at the Fair Point?
I did. I received a call around 11 p.m.-ish and then responded shortly thereafter.
Okay, was Ted Hawkins already there on the scene?
He was, along with several other officers.
Okay, at that point, were you briefed on the case?
I was.
And ultimately, Detective Hawkins, you were here for Detective Hawkins' testimony earlier.
I was.
And we were able to establish a fair surveillance video that was given to y'all's department as part of the investigation.
Correct.
To make part of your case file.
Yes, sir.
And I know earlier we were able to see when 2 vehicles came into the parking lot. You were able to see that, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you've been able to review the surveillance video
I have.
in advance of court.
I have. Yes, sir.
And for the record, that would be State's Exhibit 82. Or excuse me, State's Exhibit 80. You're able to review the surveillance video before that.
Yes, sir.
Were y'all able to see and get times on when the vehicles came into the parking lot and when they exited the parking lot?
We were.
Okay. And just estimate-wise, how long did it take from the time that the Burgundy SUV that was a suspect come into the parking lot to the time that second vehicle?
The timestamp on the video will be a little bit more accurate, but I believe it was around 9:50, and then about maybe 2 to 3 minutes later, it exits back out.
Okay. We could, Your Honor, we're going to republish in its entirety. I know we had some trouble with Detective Hawkins earlier when he was on the stand. It states any between times, the relevant times. It's about 3 months, Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
And you can feel free to narrate since there's no sound to take the paid times. This is 9:50.
That's going to be Miss Kingsborough's red Charger, followed quickly by a dark-colored
All right, you
SUV.
can pause it there, Walter. What's the time on that when they come in the parking lot?
Approximately 9:50 and 22 seconds right there.
You can go ahead and play it through. This is what appears to be a burgundy or dark-colored Suburban coming back out of the parking lot.
Yes, sir.
And what is the time? You can read that.
I believe it says 9:53:35. Yep, 9:53:35 p.m.
Okay, so if my math is correct, and I'm not real good at math, but it's a little over 3 minutes.
Correct.
And it appears he's coming out, almost hits the vehicle there, coming out at a high rate of speed.
It does, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And Detective Payton, after you're able to get briefed on what's going on there at the scene, were you able to see Miss Kingsborough's body there in the car?
I did.
Okay, so you're able to observe the scene. And where did you go after that?
When I initially arrived at Fair, I was briefed, spoke quickly with a witness who was later interviewed by another officer, and then I approached the car and observed Ms. Kingsborough in her vehicle. And it was around this time that I was advised, I believe by Captain Hamilton, that it was believed the suspect had traveled to somewhere in the 385 I-26 area and was threatening to or had possibly committed suicide.
Okay, did you have a name of your suspect at that point?
I believe I did, based on some prior information. We knew him to be Benny Brown.
And did you respond to this location?
I did. Initially, I was directed to 385 and 26, and then while en route, I received a phone call, I believe from dispatch, with some updated information that he had actually returned home, excuse me, to Barrel State Road, and then I received, I believe, another phone call as I got closer that an incident had occurred involving a deputy being shot.
Okay, you're hearing this on radio traffic as you're driving to the location?
No, I believe this was via cell phone. Dispatch calling me because they knew that I was headed that way.
Okay, they advised you that there had been a shooting in front of a residence and there was a deputy.
Correct.
Could you tell the jury what you see as you come on the scene here? What's the situation?
When I got there, I had to park a little ways back because there were other officers that had responded. And so as I exited, I walked up Barrel Stave Road there and initially met with a Lawrence County investigator that I knew and was advised that the suspect was still in the house and had barricaded himself in, shut the door, and that prior to that he had shot a deputy, and that they were awaiting the arrival of their SWAT team at that time.
Okay. And were you there when the defendant, Benny Brown, comes out of the house?
I was.
Okay. And you recognize him, see the guy you saw come out of the house in the courtroom today?
I do. He's seated at the defense table.
Okay. And you witnessed him coming out the door and giving himself up?
I did from the roadway.
Tell the jury what you did next. Did you approach where he was?
I did. Lieutenant McIntosh and I approached where he was laying right in front of the steps of his residence there. And there were some other officers standing around. And I recognized Investigator Veal, who I had known prior to this. And they were all standing around. And I remember Investigator Veal advising him of his Miranda rights. And then he turned around and kind of walked off.
Okay, and so you heard him advise, Investigator Veal advise the defendant of his rights?
I did.
What did he say?
He had advised him that he had the right to remain silent, that anything he said could be used against him in court, that he had the right to an attorney, and I believe that he told him that he didn't have to talk to us, to stop talking.
And did, just from your observation, did the defendant appear to understand what Detective Veal was talking about?
He did. I remember he kept saying, yeah.
So he answered in the affirmative when he was asked, do you understand your rights?
He did.
After he was advised of his rights and said he understood them, did you have a conversation, question and answer with the defendant?
I did. When I walked up, he was laying kind of on his stomach, handcuffed, and while I was squatted down talking to him, I kind of squatted down beside his head, his shoulder, and the SWAT medic was checking his injury. And I explained to him who I was, or introduced who I was, and just told him that I was there about the incident that had happened earlier in Fountain Inn.
What did he say?
He told me that he had confronted his wife, Peaches, which is what he referred to her as, about some, extramarital affairs. And he said that he had confronted her in the past, and she indicated that she would stop. And then he said, I work in Gray Court, and she works in Fountain Inn, and I had made my mind up that she wasn't going to stop. And then he went on to tell me that he had confronted her in the parking lot that night, and that every time he would try to talk to her about it, she would begin yelling at him, and he made the statement, and that was it. And then I followed up with the question, and then you shot her? And he stated yes. And then he asked, did I kill her? I hope she's okay. And it was around that time that EMS was coming down and starting to tend to him medically, and so I stepped away.
Okay. And when he said approached or followed her in there, and that was it, that's all he described?
Yeah, I distinctly remember him saying, and that was it.
And then you followed up, shot her, and he answered the phone.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever indicate during this conversation anything else about that event other than he was upset and her having some affairs? Was the reason why he went up there?
Not that I recall.
Did he say anything about having any kind of physical altercation with Peaches that night?
He didn't. He just said that she was yelling at him. That was the only
It
thing.
was just words. That's a good.
Yes, sir.
After this interaction, you obviously are involved in the investigation with the Fountain Inn part, correct?
Correct.
You and Zach Hawkins were leading that part of the investigation.
Yes, sir.
Were y'all able to collect bullet shell casing to get the sled involved with y'all's case, the Bear homicide?
Yes, sir. A shell casing and a projectile were collected.
I'm going to show you what's in the states 94 and 95. And first, if you could just take a look at those. Take,
Yes, sir.
just by way of comparison, we'll first refer to states 94. I'm going to show you states 5 and 6. If you can pull those up on the screen. States 5, states 6. Okay, this is states number 5. And, you come to the scene and are able to observe inside the car Ms. Kingsbury's body. Back here, there's something marked.
Yes, sir.
Is that states 94, the casing?
It would be, yes, sir.
Okay. That was collected for purposes of sending later to SLED for analysis, right?
Yes, sir.
And ultimately, it was taken to SLED for analysis sometime later.
It was.
States, and if you can go to number 6, and this is just a closer up of the casing on the ground behind the vehicle.
That's correct.
And states 95, I believe you were in the courtroom for the forensic officer from Greenville earlier. Find this in the car door, passenger car door, states 95, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's a spent bullet, or a bullet, projectile.
Projectile from inside the front passenger door.
And that's this states 95, it's in this package.
Yes, sir.
Looks like it kind of mushroomed out there.
Correct.
And these two were sent for comparison to state law enforcement.
That's correct.
At some point, they returned back to the report. You didn't actually do that analysis slip.
Correct.
That would be for other ways. Nicole Kingsborough's body was taken for an autopsy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And which doctor did that autopsy?
I forget the doctor's name. Janice Ross, I believe.
We can pull up states 98, please. I get it. I got a copy of it right here. It's already been one. Now, here, states 98. That's a good favor.
Yes, sir. Which was, yes, Dr. Janice Ross.
Okay, she's a pathologist down in Newberry.
Yes, sir.
And she was, this is the report that she sent to y'all with her findings on cause and manner of death.
Correct.
Okay. And if you could tell the jury, what were the findings on cause and manner of death for Nicole Kingsborough?
Final diagnosis is fatal intermediate range perforating gunshot wound of the head which lacerated the brain. Manner of death is homicide. Probable cause and mechanism of death, laceration of the brain due to gunshot wound to the head.
Okay, so quite simply, from what y'all already observed, there was a gunshot entry wound in Nicole Kingsborough's forehead, right?
It was, I believe it was right here above kind of the bridge of her nose, right eye, or left eye, right
Okay.
there.
And There was also this bullet that was found in the door that looked like it had passed through the inside of the door and was stuck in the
Correct.
And Dr. Rawson's conclusions here, the single gunshot wound to the head, which are documented in States 98, are consistent with physical evidence y'all know.
Correct.
Based on those physical findings and Benny Brown's statement to you that he was the one that shot Nicole, and the surveillance video that shows him coming in and out of the parking lot, or a vehicle that looks like his, did y'all charge him?
He was charged.
What was the charge?
He was charged with murder and possession of a weapon or commission of violent crime.
Okay. There's also, I believe y'all did some GSR collection as well. We all going to be getting GSR kits from his hands.
I believe a GSR kit was done.
Okay, but not, maybe not by Fountain. That was done.
It wouldn't have been done by us, no, sir.
And that was after he was already, Benny Brown was in the hospital with his gunshot.
I don't know where it was taken, but it would have been after, certainly after he was in the ambulance and probably away from the scene.
Right. And to your understanding, those GSR results were sent to SLED for analysis.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Thank you for some knowledge.
Yes.
No further questions for you? Say, please answer your questions.
Yes, sir.
Officer Hayden, I'm gonna take you back to the front steps of Benny's house that night.
Okay.
And you have a recollection of Benny Brown being arrested right there at the front steps.
Yes, sir.
And you recall Sergeant Beal reading him Miranda.
Yes, sir.
Then you, I believe you testified previously in a different hearing that Sergeant Beal said something to him and kind of walked away.
Correct.
And then another person who I don't think you could remember put the question to Benny, do you know who you shot? Do you know who you shot? And he was not responsive. He didn't respond to that question.
I remember somebody asking him, do you know who you shot? Do you know what you've done? Something to that effect. I don't remember if he had an answer, but I do remember somebody telling him that he had shot a police officer.
Do you know an officer by the name of Plaxico?
I do, yes, sir.
Could it have been Plaxico that said, do you know who you shot? Do you know who you shot? And then informed Benny, you shot a deputy. Could it have been Plaxico?
It could have, but I don't recall.
But something along those lines happened.
Yes, sir.
Now, when Benny did talk to you there at the steps, he said that he went to confront Nicole about infidelity.
Yes, sir.
She was having multiple affairs.
I don't remember if he said multiple. I remember he said that he had gone there to confront her about an affair or affairs.
And that he brought it up in conversation with her, and she was yelling at him.
Correct. His statement to me was every time he would try to talk to her about it, she would yell back at him.
And that's when he hit the breaking point and shot.
I assume so, yes, sir.
Now, I mean, he kind of compresses that 5 minutes in just a couple of words, because we know he was there about 5 minutes with Nicole, right?
I think we timed it. It was about 3 minutes, a little over 3 minutes from the time he went in to the time he came out.
Yeah, I thought it was closer to 5, but I could be wrong. But the jury will have it. Obviously, those words that you just repeated to us, the words that Benny gave you, kind of compress the 3 or 4 minutes into a pretty tiny little bite, don't they?
Yeah, it was a brief conversation he and I
he didn't give you a second-by-second play on exactly what happened. He kind of condensed it.
Correct.
And he didn't tell you that, for instance, he followed her right into the parking lot behind her car.
I don't remember him saying that. I just remember him saying that he had confronted her in the parking lot.
Right? But, for instance, what car he was driving, did he follow her in? He didn't tell you these things.
No, sir.
But we know they happened.
Correct.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about GSR and what that is. And you're going to help me educate the jury if they don't know about it. Okay?
I'll do this.
GSR stands for gunshot residue.
Correct.
And it's particles that don't occur in nature by themselves.
I don't know about that definition.
Okay.
I'm not a forensic guy, so I don't know about that definition. But
Okay. Well, there are particles, solid particles, that when a gun is fired, these particles go up in the air and then land on people's clothes, their skin, that sort of thing.
correct.
And the reason you take gunshot residue samples is to determine if somebody fired a gun.
Correct.
And they can you can determine if you can take a T-shirt or a shirt and you can determine if it has GSR on it.
Sometimes yes.
Well, as long as it's not washed or laundered or shaken about, the GSR stays on it.
Yeah, it's my understanding as long as it's in, I guess, close enough proximity to have had it on it in the first place, then yeah, it should still be there.
Correct. It doesn't degrade naturally or decompose. It has to be washed off the body or laundered from clothes.
That's my understanding, yes.
And Benny went to a hospital after he was shot,
Correct.
and they took GSR samples from his hands. And you can do that by dabbing a little kit on the hand. You take the top of the palm, bottom of the palm, both hands.
Correct.
And I know it's not your case, because your case is a found-in case.
Correct.
As far as you know, no one did gunshot residue on Rico, who also went to a hospital.
Yeah, I would have no knowledge of that.
Your involvement, because I know that Clinton assisted Lawrence, I didn't know Fountain was also assisting at the scene. Your involvement in it was your conversation with Benny?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
you would have no need to follow up with gunshot residue on Chris Brown or Rico?
Correct.
Now, all evidence that you have, it doesn't seem to be much, indicates that the confrontation between Benny and Nicole was about her having affairs.
That was from Mr. Brown, yes, sir.
I mean, this was not a robbery or killing somebody for insurance proceeds, financial gain. The only evidence you have that this event happened was based on them being man and wife and her having an affair.
And I guess the argument that ensued over that.
Right. The pathology report that you just read from a little while ago, the manner of death, of course, would be homicide.
Correct.
And if you can tell the jury what the definition of homicide is.
The willful killing of another.
Well, it's actually when a human kills another human, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that can be in all types of manners.
Yeah.
Accident is homicide if I accidentally shoot somebody.
I guess.
Well, it's a human killing a human, right?
It's a human killing a human, but it wasn't intentional.
Sure. But even self-defense, if you act in self-defense, that's also a homicide, right? And voluntary manslaughter, that's also a homicide.
Correct.
Basically, any situation where a human kills another human, that's homicide.
Correct.
Some are lawful, some are not.
Correct.
And there are differing degrees of that with regard to culpability.
Correct.
I can have just, sure.
Just to follow up on those questions, there was no indication that this was a justifiable homicide where Benny Brown was acting in self-defense. You don't have any evidence that you can see at the scene of fair.
No, sir. In fact, the door was locked, her car door was locked, and the window was only rolled down a small amount.
Okay. So y'all's deputy who testified earlier had to actually unlock the car. Right?
Sergeant McBride, yes, sir.
So Sergeant McBride also observed that the car was running when he got there, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
Is there any evidence whatsoever that Nicole Kingsborough had exited the car and had some kind of confrontation with Mr. Brown?
Not that we're aware of, no, sir.
Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence that anyone else had gotten into the vehicle with her?
No, not that I'm aware of.
No further questions.
Just very brief. There was not a single witness who saw Benny and Nicole interacting in that parking lot.
Correct.
Nobody saw them talking or doing anything.
Yes, sir.
Whatever happened, Benny didn't tell you about it, you just don't know about it.
Right.
And he only told you just a couple of words.
Correct.
That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much for coming. Well, pretty good. Solicitor, call you next week, please.
Your Honor, stay close to that light.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about giving this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Lieutenant Blackman, you were the investigator on call July 13, 2011 for the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you received a phone call that night from Lieutenant Marty Crane?
Yes, sir.
And what was that in reference to?
It was in reference to the initial call from the Ferrer plant that a homicide had transpired there. And originally, it was told to me that it may have been the Faurecia plant across the road, which is in our jurisdiction, only to find out within a few moments of looking at the address on the computer that it was actually the Ferrer plant in the city of Fountain Inn.
Okay. And that Ferrer plant, are you familiar with that location?
Yes, sir.
That's only, it's less than half a mile in the county of Lawrence, isn't it?
That's about right. It's across the highway from the county jurisdiction. On that side, it would be the city's Fountain Inn City.
Okay, so it's just before you get into Greenville County?
That's correct.
All right, and at the time you get the call from Lieutenant Crane about the homicide up at the Ferrer plant, did you have a suspect name given to you?
Yes, sir. Lieutenant Crane had explained to me that it was the husband or boyfriend of the victim, and it was Benny Ray Brown, Jr.
Okay, what about, as far as his whereabouts, what information were you given?
That he was going to kill himself somewhere along 385.
Okay. And then, is it true that y'all got information at first that he would be on Kingsborough Drive off of Apple Orchard?
Yes, sir. That was kind of the initial report that I believe the family had called in the dispatch from that Kingsborough Drive address.
Okay. But then later, you got information that in fact he had gone home to Barrel Save Road?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you respond to 545 Barrel Save?
Yes, sir.
All right. What was going on by the time you got there?
By the time I arrived, I had already heard shots fired call over the police radio, and I arrived just behind the ambulance. When I got there, Lieutenant Crane and Officer Garrison were administering first aid to Deputy Rice. At that point, I went to find an EMT and bring them to Deputy Rice. I saw some blood on his arm, and he was not responsive at that time. At that point, I joined Lieutenant Robinson from the Clinton Police Department and covered the side exit of the house because Mr. Brown was still inside. From there, I spoke with my sheriff, who contacted the State Law Enforcement Division and had Captain Bishop call me and ask what sort of resources I needed. I remember telling him that I was going to need possibly the SWAT team for the individual inside of the house. We didn't know any further intentions out of Mr. Brown at that time, as well as crime scene and field agents, because I learned also that Lieutenant Plaxico and others had fired into the residence and exchanged fire with Mr. Brown.
Okay, so all the gun fighting happened before you got there.
About 2 minutes before I got there.
Okay, so you requested SLED assistance, SWAT team, and then crime scene investigation from SLED?
Yes, sir, as well as field agents to assist with interviewing folks.
Okay, but ultimately, SWAT team wasn't needed, is that right?
No, sir. Our special response team had also been activated and responded. Commander Veal and Lieutenant Hopfield of that team had arrived shortly thereafter.
And then, in fact, law enforcement didn't have to go in to extract him. He did eventually surrender.
That's correct. Mr. Brown made contact with our communications center, expressed his medical issues to them, that he had been injured and that he wanted to give up without any further fighting. I believe he was told to place his weapon down or open the door with his hands up, and I believe another officer, Captain Richardson, may have been communicating over a loudspeaker to him, and he opened the door and came out.
Okay, so were you there when the ambulance took Deputy Rice away?
Yes, sir.
And do you know approximately how long you were there? You said you got there about 2 minutes after the guns were fired. And then, do you know about how long you were there before Benny Brown came out of the house?
I would have to look at the dispatch records to see an exact time. But it wasn't a very long time, or it didn't seem very long.
Okay. Now, tell me about bystanders. What I mean is non-law enforcement, or civilians who were there at the scene when you got there. Did you observe any of that?
When I arrived, there were still a few bystanders outside of that yard. I think the officers on scene had kind of cleared that area. And after the shots were fired, I think everybody kind of moved out of that area fairly quickly.
Or were they still lingering around when you were there?
There may have been a few folks outside of the yard, up near the road, out of that area.
Tell me, as somebody, lead investigator responding to a scene like that, was that necessarily a safe place for non-law enforcement people to be?
No.
Okay. Were these people being given directions at any time?
To clear the area.
Clear out?
Yeah.
What was law enforcement's prime concern at that point?
At that point, officer safety and arresting Mr. Brown, getting him out without any further harm to anybody else.
And obviously getting Deputy Rice out of the
That's
scene.
correct. Getting medical attention to those who needed it.
Okay. And so, what? I don't want to be too cute, but you didn't pull out a table and chair out there and begin interviewing any of these people, did you?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, what were you doing?
Well,
Ducking behind cars?
I was behind a small outbuilding with Lieutenant Robinson. At one point, I did move from that cover to Lieutenant Plaxico's unmarked truck, where he needed to reload, as he had fired all but about 2 rounds in his gun. I remember looking at the magazine that he had taken out, and you could see the follower maybe behind the second round in the magazine. So I think he had about 2 bullets left.
Okay. You were talking blue lights going off at the time?
Yes.
Okay. So you're talking about trying to help Plaxico get live ammo for his gun so he could provide cover?
Yes, sir. I mean, by that point, I just took his spot in front of the engine block where it's safer, and he conducted a reload on his pistol, and kind of came back up there on point to where we could cover the front of the house at that time.
And did you have your firearm unholstered?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you probably weren't able to take interviews at that time? Is that take statements or anything?
No, sir.
And the directions you're giving these people is to get out of the line of fire?
That's correct. And by the time I was there with Mr. Plaxico, most everyone that I recall was well out of the yard, and were trying to leave.
Okay. And at some point, were you there when Denny did surrender and come? I think you mentioned that earlier, but you were there when he came out?
Yes.
Okay. And were you there for any statements he gave?
I actually, when Sergeant Field and the others went and placed him into custody, I went into the house, I believe with Lieutenant Hotfield, and cleared the remainder of the house to make sure there was no one else inside that was hurt. And by that time, they had Mr. Brown headed to an ambulance, and I remember Lieutenant Goggins from Clinton Police Department going to speak with Mr. Brown.
Were you present for any statements he gave?
No, sir, I was not at that time.
And there was a search warrant obtained for Denny Brown's house?
Yes, sir. There was actually 2 that I believe were obtained. One very quickly by the sheriff's office, and also by Agent Aspel from the State Law Enforcement Division got a more thorough one after the Plaxico had called, I think, another investigator to get that first search warrant to one to take Mr. Brown into custody, as well as secure evidence and things. Once I made contact with State Law Enforcement Division, they kind of did the same thing and had the search warrant that you'll find in the file.
All right, so there was a warrant, and you aware that there was a 357 recovered from inside the house?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you never found where that was in his that's State's 86.
Yes, sir. There's a diagram provided by, I believe, SLED Forensics Division that would show you approximation of where that gun was recovered inside the residence.
Do you see them over here? List of States 33, that's 357 Glock. Is that consistent with your understanding of where the pistol was found?
Yes, to my understanding.
And that would represent his front door?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is that accurate? It was a 357 Glock?
Yes, sir. It was a Glock model. The round would, I think, technically be a 357 SIG round, for just clarification.
Okay, at some point, did you learn about a Rico Kingsborough being at the scene when the shooting occurred?
Yes, sir. We learned he was already going toward the emergency medical personnel when I arrived, I believe, and he sought treatment for his injuries, and he was taken to a hospital.
What was the first time you talked with him?
The first time that he was spoken with, look at my legend right quick and flip to his statement. He was interviewed by SLED agents at the Clinton Police Department on July 14th,
Well, it's the next day.
2:34 p.m. according to his Miranda warrants.
Okay. So he was interviewed the next day. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he went to the hospital and they pretty much checked him out.
Checked
that
him in
night.
and checked him out. Yes, sir.
Gunshot wound to his leg. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did, to your knowledge, did he admit to having a pistol at the scene that night?
From my knowledge, he had taken agents, or Chris Brown had actually taken agents to recover the gun that they supposedly had within that there at the scene.
And as lead investigator of this case, have you observed that pistol before?
Yes, I've seen photographs of it. It was collected by State Law Enforcement Division. Being that one of the victims in this case was Deputy Rice, I wanted to maintain a neutral point in it without actually collecting anything myself.
Okay, so States 87, was that the pistol that turned over to your knowledge?
Yes, that looks like the photograph I was provided.
So they did admit to having a gun there. They did turn one over to law enforcement?
According to their statements to the police.
Okay. You know what kind of pistol this is? Let's take a look at this States 87.
May I handle it?
Yeah.
It's an old Mauser type.
Now, you know what caliber it is, man?
This would be a 32 or some variation thereof.
Do you know, to your knowledge, were there any 32 shell casings found at the crime scene?
Shell cases in spent rounds?
Yes, sir.
I don't recall any being found that were spent.
Okay. And I think you were in here. There was some testimony asking Officer Payton, the last witness, about GSR. Are you familiar with what GSR is?
Yes.
Okay. Are you, do you have any knowledge of whether they conducted GSR testing on Mr. Brown, Benny Brown?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if there were any results gained from that?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, do you know whether or not GSR was located on his hands?
I would have to just confirm, look back at the file, but yes, as far as I know off the, just from memory, yes. Yes, here's where the GSR kit was collected from Mr. Brown and turned over by Senior Agent Donahue with the State Law Enforcement Division in reference to taking a GSR kit from Mr. Brown.
Okay. So he did have gunshot residue on his where?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it is. From what I'm looking at, I would have to flip to another part of the document to confirm. However, that was taken by Greenville Forensic Technician Gamble, turned over to Agent Donahue, which was later related to us.
Well, Lieutenant, I'm just asking, as lead investigator, do you know whether they found gunshot residue on his hands?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. Now, are you aware of, or have you had a chance to review the autopsy records for Deputy Rice?
Yes.
Okay. And he did, in fact, pass on from the injuries he had that night?
Yes, sir.
You have the autopsy report in front of you?
Yes, sir.
All right. You got it. It's Kelly Rose, the doctor you have listed, doing the autopsy.
That's correct.
I'm going to refer you to states 99. They list the probable cause, mechanism of death.
Yes, sir. Probable cause and mechanism of death would be insanguination.
Okay, and that's bleeding out?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And does it describe the gunshot wound?
Yes, sir. The gunshot wound of the left shoulder, which perforated the right carotid artery.
Okay. So it went through the carotid artery, which caused bleeding to death. Is that what you understand this to mean?
Yes, sir.
All right. Exsanguination due to perforation of right carotid artery
That's correct.
due to,
Due to a gunshot wound in the left shoulder.
and the manner of death is listed as,
Homicide.
okay. What is the time interval of an injury that caused death?
It's listed as minutes.
And how old was Roger Rice when he passed on?
29.
Thank you. Answer your question, Mr. Chris.
Thank you.
Can we switch? As I understand it, you got a call from Marty Crane about the incident that I guess originally it happened in Fountain.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then eventually you learned about the incident that happened on Barrel State Road.
Yes, sir.
And you went out to Barrel State Road.
Yes, sir.
And when you got there, that was after all the shooting had taken place.
Yes, sir. Just a couple of moments
Okay.
after.
All right. So you didn't witness that?
No, sir. I did not witness the gunfight itself.
All right. And I've got Defendant's Exhibit 64 on the screen, which is the diagram we've been referring to a lot.
Yes, sir.
And you went back to Eric Robinson's car where Deputy Rice was.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then at some point, and I think you mentioned earlier about an outbuilding. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
And at one point, according to the summary that I read that you typed up, that you were between some outbuildings.
Yes, sir. It looked like an outbuilding and another structure or something to the right of it.
Okay. Can you talk to us about, on Defense Exhibits 64 and 128, where those outbuildings were?
They were to the right of the car shed over there. Just looks like just beyond view where you're pointing to, kind of right in that area.
All right, the shed is on the edge of that picture
Yes, sir.
of 128. And that's kind of set off to the side, and maybe a little bit behind the house, isn't it?
In that photograph, yes, sir.
And that was the shed. You've been here for this whole front, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and that's the shed that we could see earlier in some of the pictures we were dealing with Eric Robinson's vehicle.
Yes, sir.
Right. All right, and so at that point, you were, I guess, looking at the side entrance
Yes,
over
sir.
here.
That's correct.
All right, and that's the same side entrance Ben Quan testified about that he had first knocked on Vinny's door, right?
Yes, sir.
Up there.
Unless he went to the front. I've been in and out for testimony, and I don't want to testify to something.
Well, fair enough. You were receiving information in this investigation, weren't you?
Yes.
Is that right?
Receiving information?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there was, this incident happened on July 13th, going into the morning hours of the 14th, right?
That's correct.
All right. And there was an effort to interview some witnesses to begin with, wasn't there?
Yes, sir.
And one of them that cooperated was Ben Quan McGee, right?
He did.
Okay. And you know what time Ben Quan's statement was? Does this help you?
Sure. I'll make sure this is the same one. Yes, sir. It appears to be the same.
Okay.
Same.
And there's a time on that statement, isn't there?
Yes, 2:25 a.m.
All right. So that was 2:25 a.m. on the morning of June 14th.
That's correct.
All right. And so if this happened around 11:30 the night before, that was within just a few hours.
Yes, sir.
And there's been some questions about gunshot residue collection, right?
Yes.
And you know that SLED likes to have the test collections done within 6 hours, right?
That's correct.
And so, by the time that Ben Quan McGee gave you that statement, we're still within that 6-hour window, aren't we?
Yes, sir. He gave that statement to Senior Special Agent E.G. Donahue from State Law Enforcement Division.
Okay.
Not to be confusing with anything you said, but you
Right.
kind of referred as I took it, but
Okay.
that agent took that statement.
All right. But you're receiving information. You were the lead investigator.
Yeah, from the sheriff's office.
And by that time, you had SLED on the scene. Debbie Jones was there.
That's correct.
All right. And Investigator Donahue was there, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you all know from Ben Quan's statement and other things that you put together that Ben Quan is talking about Rico Kingsborough and Chris Brown, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So at 2:25 a.m., still within the 6-hour window, you had information about Chris Brown and Rico Kingsborough, right?
We knew they were around and that the police were talking to them at that time. There were a lot of people at the Clinton Police Department with a lot of agents.
And you had information that from Ben Quan in that 6-hour window that the two of them had a gun there, didn't you?
I guess the best way to answer was Agent Donahue was provided with that information and would have provided that to Agent Jones or Agent Gambrell, who would have provided it to me.
All right. And y'all knew that Rico Kingsborough had gone to the hospital, right?
Yes, sir.
And you knew that Vinny's gunshot residue was collected at the hospital in Greenville, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. As the lead investigator for the Lawrence Police Department, Lawrence Sheriff's Office, You did not send anybody to the hospital to get a gunshot residue on Rico Kinsborough, did you?
Right. At that time, he had been at the hospital. We didn't know how bad he was hurt, if they would have to do surgery or keep him overnight or into the next day.
Okay. Well, you all sent investigators to the hospital in Greenville for Benny, right?
The police went with Benny to the hospital.
And he did have to have surgery.
Assuming he had to have treatment. I have his medical records here.
Well, I was going to say, you received the medical records, and you know that he was shot in the right hip, just above the leg.
That's right.
Okay. So, to your knowledge, no law enforcement agent sent anybody to the Lawrence Hospital to get a gunshot residue on Rico, right?
Which, as far as I know, they did not, which we didn't know he was shooting until after Ben Kane's statement got around, and that's when the two agents went to, that's when agents spoke with Rico as well.
Okay. And what time was Rico Mirandized?
Rico was Mirandized at the Clinton Police Department at 2:34.
All right. So that was along about the same time that Ben Kwan was there, what?
Yeah, so he was interviewed by what appears to be Agent Sorensen and Purcell.
All right. And so you had Ben Kwan, given a statement that somebody had started charging towards me, right? And had a gun.
Yes, that's what the statement says.
All right. And you had Rico admitting that he had a gun. Is that right?
Through his own testimony.
And through his own statement.
Yeah, statement.
Yeah. And at that point, nobody took the gunshot residue collection from Rico, did they?
Apparently they didn't, which I wasn't at the Clinton Police Department at that time to interview those individuals. I was at the crime scene.
All right.
Still.
And as the lead investigator for the Lawrence Sheriff's Office, with a copy of the SLED file in front of you, you have no evidence that they took the gunshot residue from Rico Kinsborough.
No.
All right. And when you were talking about the gun earlier, Chris Brown took investigators to the gun.
That's according to the file. Yes, sir.
Okay. And I believe the word that you used on direct examination, that was the gun that Rico and Chris supposedly had out there that night.
Yes, sir.
All right. And in fact, with that file in front of you, with all the witness statements in it, you know that the gun, at least one of them described the gun out there that night as being a .22.
The sound of it, I think.
No, I'm talking about the statement.
Okay. And yes, it could very well be in there listed as a .22 or a .25. Here's where Mr. Kingsborough actually refers to it. We left my grandfather's house. Chris had a gun. I think it was a .22 or .25.
Okay, so let's stop right there. You're looking at Rico Kinsborough's statement, right?
That's correct.
And you said he described it as a .22 or a .25.
That's right.
Okay. Can you turn to Chris Brown's statement? All right, and does Chris Brown describe the gun in his statement? Yes.
That's just the three.
Well, that's the Benny's gun from earlier in the day.
Okay.
Because he described the gun that was at Barrel State Road.
Says Rico Kingsborough had his gun, a 22 caliber gun.
Okay. Let's go over that again. What time, by the way, before we do that, what time was Chris Mirandized? Chris Brown? One more page back.
He was Mirandized by Agent Jones at 3:26 a.m.
3:26 a.m.
Yes, sir.
So that's about an hour after Rico was Mirandized, right?
That's correct.
Still in the 6-hour window. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you here yesterday when Chris testified about the gun he found in the woods?
No, so I wasn't in the courtroom yesterday.
All right. If you go back to where he talked in his statement about the gun, that was at Barrel State Road. Flip over to the last page of Chris's statement. And read that again. I think it said that Rico had his 22.
Yes, it says Rico Kingsborough had his gun, a 22 caliber gun.
Okay. Rico Kingsborough had his gun, a 22 caliber gun. That's what it said.
And that's what it says, sir.
So Chris is definitely saying that Rico had a gun.
That's correct in his statement.
All right. And he took you to the gun that's in evidence, right?
He took other agents to the gun. I wasn't present for that, so I don't want to testify.
When I say you, took law enforcement to the gun.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So that's correct.
And they asked you about that a minute ago, and you said that that was a 32 caliber gun.
It appears to be a 32 caliber.
Okay. So we actually, and that's the one that Chris claims, 32. Chris claims that as his gun, right?
Yes, sir.
And Chris told you that there was a 22, right? That belonged to Rico. Told law enforcement.
That's what he says in the statement.
Okay. Now, there's some guns that are automatics, right?
Yes, sir.
And the guns that we have here are automatics, right?
That's correct.
And they're the type of guns where they discharge shell casings, right?
Typically, unless they're malfunctioning.
All right. And by the way, you received a report on all of the guns that are in evidence, right?
Yes, sir. They're
All of them were in working order.
as far as I can tell, yes, sir.
Well, as far as what SLED told you.
Right. As far as I'm not the examiner.
All right.
And
But you received a report that said all the guns, including Chris's gun, were in working order, didn't you?
yes, sir.
Okay. Now, there are also revolvers, right?
Yes.
And a 22 can be a revolver, right?
Yes.
And a revolver is not going to discharge a shell casing like an automatic or semi-automatic weapon, is it?
Not typically, unless you pick it out.
Right. And so by 3:30 in the morning, you have information that supposedly the 32 was there, right? And that possibly a 25 was there, right?
Yes, sir.
And that Rico had a 22 there. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And you have that whole SLED file right there in front of you. There is nothing in there that indicates that there was gunshot residue collected from Chris Brown either, was it?
That's right.
Even though he's at the Clinton Police Department in that 6-hour window.
Yes, sir.
And you had 3 statements, Ben Kwan's, Rico's, and Chris, about Rico and Chris having guns.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Now, were you here today when there was testimony about the burgundy car being between Mr. Prather's or Officer Prather's car and Lieutenant Flexico's car?
Yes, I was around for that.
Okay. And if you go back to Ben Kwan McGee's statement, Are you there?
Just a moment, sir.
Would you like to look at this one? I think we already determined it.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
All right. Ben Kwan talks about guns being put into the burgundy car that was right up here, Dave.
As far as testimony today?
As far as the statements, the information that
Yeah,
you
well,
had.
that's how, I'm assuming they got there, and departed.
All right, but Ben Kwan says that that weapons were put in the burgundy automobile, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's information that you had at 2:30 in the morning, right after this incident happened, right?
Within a few hours. Yeah.
Okay, and you testified on direct about there being 2 search warrants. The initial, for Barrel State Road, the initial one was to be able to arrest Benny, right?
And that's correct, just to make entry into the house and secure Ms. Brown.
And then Agent Asbill from SLED got there, and you got a second search warrant to be able to search Benny's house, right?
That's right.
All right, and you have that SLED file in front of you. Nobody ever got a search warrant to search that burgundy car, did they?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. So if that burgundy car carried away a .22, y'all never went to look for it.
We didn't know there was a 22 until several hours later. According to this statement, if he's not meaning another gun.
Okay. Well,
I
the
took
statement was precise,
Yeah.
right?
Given the way the statement's written, I believe the agents interpret it to be the 32.
But it says a .22.
Yeah.
All right. The point is nobody ever looked for the .22, did they?
I would assume that the agents thought the 22 was the
You're
32,
assuming.
and I don't want to testify for the agents
Okay.
either that took the statement or went and recovered the gun.
All right. But there's nothing in that SLED file that says, hey, they said there was a .22 or a .25, we got a .32, and there's no follow-up on that, is there?
The recovery of the 32, you probably maybe want to ask the officers that recovered it that actually sat and spoke with Mr. McGee and Chris.
Well, it's 2 different things, right?
The calibers?
Yes.
A 32 and a 22 are different.
Okay. All right. You also, in the file, got a statement from, or law enforcement got a statement from somebody named Robert Long, right?
That's right.
Robert Perry Long?
Yes.
All right. And he provided information about a car that went down the road and turned around in his driveway. Is that right?
According to Mr. Long's statement, there were 2 or 3 cars in the middle of the road, and they pulled off and went down the road, and one car turned around in my driveway and went back towards the suspect's house, and one shot was fired off, and a few moments later a couple more cars pulled up and pulled back off, and the 2 police officers pulled up, and as soon as they got out of the car, the suspect started firing his weapon. The first vehicle was a newer silver color car. I didn't see who was shooting at the police officers, but I assumed it was the man in the house.
Robert Perry Long lives on Barrel State Road, 659 Barrel State Road, right?
Yes, sir, at that time.
So he's at the time, right? He was a neighbor at the time, right? Right.
Yes.
And he has somebody driving by and firing towards Benny's house, right?
According to his statement, yes, sir.
And that was before the officers got there.
Yes, sir. According to the statement.
today when Rico Kinsborough testified, weren't you?
Yes.
So you were here when he testified that he intended to shoot Benny Brown.
That's correct.
You were here when Rico testified that he intended to kill Benny Brown.
Yes, sir.
You were here when Rico testified and admitted to his guilt to conspiracy to commit murder.
Yes, sir.
And in the statements and everything that you have in that SLED file, and your own file, there's nothing about Rico Kinsborough volunteering on June 13th or the early morning hours of the 14th. Nothing about him volunteering in his statements that he was intending to shoot and kill Benny Brown that night, is there?
No, other than, just that they were there, and then his testimony today.
I trust he'll be charged.
I passed that to this,
For your record.
Officer Blackman, Lieutenant Blackman. I'm going to ask again about this stage 87. It's listed as a 7.65 millimeter.
Yes, sir.
All right. Same caliber's a 32.
That's correct.
All right, so a 32 bullet will fit that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Objection to the leading.
To your knowledge.
I can explain. Based on the markings on it with the 7.62 engraved on the slide there, that would indicate that the millimeter converts to a .32 caliber of an inch.
Okay. Now, to your knowledge, are there any stent 7.65 millimeter casings anywhere on this property?
Not to my knowledge.
A stent, explain to the jury what a shell casing is. What happens when you fire a gun like that?
When you fire a semi-automatic pistol, the rounds in there, the hammer strikes, and the slide comes back, and an empty casing comes out. And it's just a piece of brass. The projectile travels where the gun is aimed, and the empty casing is just kind of left to the side.
Falls on the ground, right?
Typically, yes.
If I loaded this gun, put the clip in it, fired it, the bullet would hit the ceiling, and the empty casing would eject and land on the floor.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Now, again, were there any empty 7.65 or 32 caliber casings anywhere on the scene?
Not to my knowledge.
All right? And that is the gun that Chris Brown admitted to and voluntarily gave you guys. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any way of, would you have been able to find that gun had he not voluntarily given it over to you?
Without him supplying it to the SLED agents, no, sir.
So he handed it over.
Just
He
of
did.
his
You would-
own accord. Yes,
Right.
sir.
Now, as a matter of fact, let me do the diagram. And I'm almost done. Just want to be brief here, but the overhead diagram. Now, driveway over here. Are you familiar with what these two markers represent? 34 and 35?
I believe I know the answer off the top of my head, but I don't want to be wrong. So I want to consult my notes right quick. And you say marker 34 and 35 is,
That's right, set marker 34 and 35.
yes, sir. They're listed on here as live round 7.65 millimeter.
That's right, live rounds.
Means they haven't been fired.
What caliber?
7.65, which converts
Which
to
matches what gun?
Mauser.
Unfired.
They would fit that.
Okay. You just testified you were here in Rico, Kingsborough.
Yes.
Are you, testified. What was he talking about when he was up at the top of the driveway trying to rack the gun? What was going on?
He said it, if I recall correctly, he said the gun fell apart. Or
Bullets were falling out,
bullets
right?
fell out of the bottom.
Bullets that matched this gun, they handed over voluntarily to you guys.
That's correct.
So the evidence is consistent with what he was telling you.
Yes, sir.
And you found no stent casings from the 7.65, aka 32 caliber pistol.
No, we didn't find any spent cases, just the whole bullet that had been fired.
They admitted having that gun, they turned it over.
That's correct.
And then were you here? Chris Brown was testifying.
Was that yesterday?
What's today?
Today's Tuesday. Okay. I was actually in your office all day yesterday. I wasn't in here.
Okay, so you didn't hear his testimony.
No, sir.
Those unfired bullets fit in that pistol. You didn't find any 22 caliber bullets out there, or guns or anything, did you?
I didn't. To my knowledge, there weren't any found.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
I'll be brief. Just for the record, Your Honor, the statements of Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown are already pre-marked in evidence without objection. Essentially, you're relying on Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown to tell you the full truth, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And the bottom line is that there's no way of determining how many people actually had guns at Barrel State Road that night, is it?
No, sir. There would be no scientific way to prove who did and who didn't.
Or what kind of guns they were.
Right.
All right, so there very well could have been a 22 out there, just like they said it was, correct?
There could be a lot of. I mean, I don't want to subjugate to something that we don't know.
But the point is when they're saying that only one had a gun and not both of them, again, law enforcement's relying on Rico Kinsborough and Chris Brown, right?
That's correct. Given their sworn statements that there was a gun there, and given the way it's written, I would assume that it's just he didn't know what caliber he was looking at.
And those were the same people that didn't volunteer that they were there to kill Benny that night. That's right.
Yes, sir.
And you're aware that both Chris and Rico, excuse me, have been arrested before for shooting guns at people.
Without consulting their criminal history, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
But
I know there was testimony earlier by Mr. Kingsborough that he had been in trouble for some.
Well, let's assume that they both have testified that they've been arrested for shooting guns at people, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. And those are the people that you're relying on to be truthful.
Yes, sir.
Nothing further.
All right, so you can step down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you are free to stay or listen.
All right.
So that concludes your witness front half of the day. Okay.
Go to 3 in the morning.
All right, please. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, we're going to start a little bit later tomorrow morning. I didn't realize how far my court reporter, this is the first time I've worked with her. She's originally from Florida. I didn't realize how far she had to get here in the morning. So we're going to start around 9 o'clock instead of 8:45, okay? Besides, we're ahead of schedule, so I think we're going to minutes. Again, same admonition as last night. Don't do any research about the case. Don't talk to anybody about the case. You have to channel surf this evening and see a story on the TV. Just keep on surfing, all right? Don't look at it. Some of you may subscribe to the Lawrence Advertiser. I think it does come out on Wednesdays. If you have home delivery and your normal routine is to read the table, have a cup of coffee, there's going to be a story of an actor do, however, have a lovely evening. Be back in the jury room at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And we should thank you again. All right, very good. Y'all have a pleasant evening. I'll see y'all in the morning around 9. Give you 10 o'clock. Very good. My wife has one of those. She uses PCR.
See you tomorrow? Yes, sir. Nice night.